Today's MSX episode will begin with a Manic Miner clone that I was never particularly interested in until I bought myself an MSX computer and caught a couple of tapes for it while at it about 20 years ago. One of the tapes was a compilation called MS Extra from Alligator, featuring 4 games, one of which was the said Manic Miner clone, Blagger. Of course, Blagger was originally made for the Commodore 64 in 1983 and was ported to 7 other machines, but oddly ZX Spectrum wasn't one of them. Somehow, at least in my opinion, MSX seems to be the most suitable platform for the game. Anyway, despite the obvious style, Blagger is a platformer which requires a bit more thought and impeccable timing than Manic Miner ever did, which can be considered either a challenge or nuisance. Even the first screen offers such a challenging puzzle that it took me ages to get through it. If you grew up with Manic Miner like I did, most of the clone games usually were made worse simply by the way your character jumped around. And Blagger doesn't really differ from the other clones in that regard, because instead of a nicely circular jump arc, Blagger's character jumps in an oddly angular style. Also, learning to recognize the collision points and allow drop distances is enough to make the first level already a real-life nightmare, but once you get through that, the game actually becomes pretty interesting and somewhat playable, which actually can't be said of all the many Manic Miner clones. Next up we have Eggerland Mystery, released in 1985 by HAL Laboratory. This one I didn't actually learn about until about 10 years ago, but it has been since in my most often revisited MSX games list. The NES sequels titled Adventures of Lolo were familiar to me from a long way before that, but I wanted to add this one here because Eggerland Mystery on the MSX was where the series began. This is a puzzle game not unlike Pengo and Sokoban, in that the gameplay is heavily based on pushing certain types of blocks around. The basic idea here is to just collect all the framed diamonds or coins or whatever you want to call them in order to open a door to the next level. What makes the game increasingly troublesome is the amount and variety of enemies and obstacles thrown at you as you progress in the game. You do have an ability to shoot some sort of magical energy at your enemies, which will enclose them into eggs for a brief period of time, which you then have to shoot off to get rid of them for good. Kind of reminds me of Dig Dug, actually. For much of the time, though, you won't have any of these bullets of magical energy given, so the focus is really on brain work here. Eggerland Mystery is still one of the games that are recognized as MSX household titles, despite its more common and popular Lolo series on the Nintendo consoles, and I find myself more attracted to the more simplistic style and approach in the original game. Highly recommended. It wasn't until some 15 years ago when I started to actually collect MSX games because, to be honest, I didn't really have the money for that sort of collecting before. One of the first games from that time was The Goonies, another classic Konami game. While this is arguably the most famous of the 3 very different games based on the movie, it was strangely also the last one I ever saw and played, but it was still before the 2000s, so I count this one as one of the nostalgia trip games from my youth. Much like in the Famicom game, which wasn't released on the NES, the idea is to rescue all the kids from behind locked doors from increasingly difficult to navigate cavern mazes, which are interconnected through a series of doors. On your way, you need to fight various types of enemies and collect power-ups. There are 5 levels in total, all accessible with a password you collect from the end of each of the previous levels, so it's not as if you need to sit through the entire game in one go. It has been said, the second Nightmare game, Maze of Gallius, is one of the most influential platforming adventure games ever created, but I can't help but think that Goonies on the MSX shares some of that credit. Well, the Goonies doesn't take the role-playing sort of character advancement system as far, nor is it as complex as Maze of Gallius. It does have a slightly more appealing look and a more humane difficulty curve, and it can't be denied that the movie connection and the music makes the game more appealing to a Western audience. Still, I can't say I prefer this over the other two Goonies games, but it is different enough to play it on its own terms. To read more about all three Goonies games and its versions, you can click on the link provided in the video description. Probably the best pinball game ever released for the MSX, at least as far as I can tell, is HAL Laboratories' Rollerball from 1984. It's a surprisingly advanced pinball game for its time, and I place it somewhere along the same level as Nintendo's Pinball from around the same time. Rollerball consists of 4 screens, which is quite a lot for a pinball game. In fact, if this were to be made as an actual pinball table, it would take the space of 2 tables. Wikipedia says the 4th screen is a bonus screen, only accessible through a certain hole, but that article is based around the NES version that was released 4 years after the MSX original, which differs from that one quite a bit. It is true that there are 4 screens in the MSX version as well, but the structure is very different, and the 4th screen is lodged oddly between the 2nd and 4th ones, and can only be accessed through the 4th screen. The unique thing about the MSX Rollerball is that they labeled all the sequences in letters, so you will have no problems figuring out how to complete all the possible goals. Being a huge fan of virtual pinballs, I'm always glad to find at least one very good pinball game on an 8-bit machine, and it took me a while to find Rollerball, not having learned of it until 10 years ago or so. But I'm glad to own it as an original cartridge now, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who's considering getting themselves an MSX. Today's episode shall end with another 1984 game, this time an MSX exclusive by Taito called Xyzolog. This weird title caught my attention in my first MSX emulation days because of its weird title. People didn't seem to be completely sure whether it was supposed to be spelled XYZolog or XYXolog, because the game logo styling appears to allow for both interpretations. Despite its odd title, Xyzolog is a surprisingly simple yet addicting game in which you roll a ball or a marble around single-screen levels and turn off red lights by rolling over them. All the levels are designed to feature plenty of differently placed ramps to make your rolling around a bit more challenging, and the challenge only gets more intense with a number of propeller-looking enemy vessels roaming around the place, which you can either avoid completely or blast away by exploding yourself. Therein lies the real trick of Xyzolog. Exploding yourself is the only weapon in the game, but doing so makes you lose a life. Then again, blasting enemies can, with any luck of performing an effective combo, give you lots of points, which really is the whole idea in an arcade-like game such as this. Completing a level will reward you with an extra life, so the optimal strategy would be to use an explosion only once per level. Xyzolog is one of those games that could have easily been an arcade classic had it been made as such. But for some reason, being officially an MSX exclusive, it was sadly overlooked for many years until it eventually got converted for the Sega Master System as a Korea exclusive release, as well as for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. I think it definitely deserves to be ported to other platforms, but the way things are, my recommendation is to track down the MSX original and have a blast. I certainly have it on my regular MSX nostalgia tripping list.